The air in the Long Island City WeWork was a manufactured chill, a constant low-grade assault from overhead vents that seemed to target the back of Ben's neck with surgical precision. It was an atmosphere designed for productivity, which to Ben always felt more like a sterile form of sensory deprivation. The relentless hum wasn't the collaborative buzz of innovation. It was the drone of servers from the glass-encased room he was deliberately seated near, a constant reminder of his function. He was infrastructure, human and silicon, the plumbing that made the whole pre-IPO fintech machine gush with data. He ran his thumb over the worn edge of his company ID badge, the plastic yellowed and the lamination peeling at the corner where it had been swiped 1,000 times. It felt less like a key and more like a tag, marking him as company property, functional but replaceable. His desk was an island of controlled chaos in an ocean of minimalist hot desks. A second monitor propped up on a stack of O'Reilly manuals, a tangle of charging cables for devices 5 years past their prime, and a chipped ceramic mug holding the dregs of coffee from the cart outside. A brew that tasted of grit and necessity, a world away from the artisanal pour-overs the sales team expensed. His laptop, a company-issued Dell Latitude, whirred with the effort of compiling the latest build of the Helios dashboard. Its fan was a frantic, high-pitched whine against the server room's baritone hum, a mechanical sigh of exhaustion he knew all too well. He could feel the heat radiating through the cheap particle board of the desk, a warmth that did nothing to combat the aggressive air conditioning. The only thing that truly belonged to him in this space was the code itself, the millions of lines of elegant, efficient logic that were currently lighting up a 50-inch screen in the Hudson Yards Executive Suite, a place he'd only ever seen in marketing photos. He was the ghost in this machine, the architect of a palace he wasn't permitted to enter, and the weight of that invisibility felt heavier than any server rack. He glanced at the clock in the corner of his monitor, the numbers glowing a placid blue, and felt a familiar tightening in his gut. Alistair was due to walk the floor, and the air always changed when he did, growing colder and sharper like a pressure drop before a storm. The shift was palpable before it was visible. A subtle change in the rhythm of the keyboards, a stiffening of postures, a collective unspoken brace for impact. Then, the scent arrived, a vanguard of expensive wood and spice that cut through the stale office air of burnt coffee and recycled oxygen. It was Alistair's signature, a fragrance that cost more per ounce than the coffee Ben drank in a week. Alistair moved not like an employee, but like a proprietor inspecting his domain. His suit was a deep charcoal Italian wool that seemed to absorb the harsh fluorescent light and reflect back pure confidence, tailored so precisely it looked less like clothing and more like a second skin. The sound of his leather-soled shoes on the polished concrete was a series of sharp, declarative clicks that announced his arrival with an authority Ben's worn sneakers could never muster. He didn't walk the most direct path. He weaved between desks, a hand briefly on a shoulder here, a low, charming murmur there, collecting fealty like a monarch collecting taxes. Ben kept his eyes fixed on his screen, feeling Alistair's approach as a change in gravitational pull. He could feel the gazes of his colleagues flicker toward his desk, a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. The golden boy was nearing the code wizard's hovel. "There he is!" Alistair's voice boomed, rich and performative, aimed not at Ben but at a junior analyst trailing in his wake. "Our code wizard, Ben, tucked away with his servers, making the magic happen." The words were a poisoned compliment, a public act of diminishment that reduced Ben's complex architectural work to a parlor trick. It was a verbal pat on the head, delivered with a smile that never reached the cold calculation in his eyes. Ben felt the heat creep up his neck, a familiar burn of impotent rage. He didn't look up. Acknowledging it would be to accept the role Alistair had cast for him. He just kept typing, the clatter of his keys a small, defiant noise in the sudden pocket of silence around his desk. Alistair paused, his shadow falling over Ben's keyboard, a momentary eclipse. He was enjoying the silence, letting the humiliation settle. If you enjoy stories of karma, hidden secrets, and the quiet power of the underestimated, subscribe now to witness how the truth always finds a way to surface. From his seat in the open-plan bullpen, Ben had a perfect, soundproofed view into the main boardroom, the Hudson Room, through a floor-to-ceiling glass wall. It was like watching a silent film about his own life, directed by and starring someone else. Alistair was at the head of the colossal mahogany table, a maestro conducting an orchestra of data that Ben himself had composed. On the massive screen behind him, the Helios dashboard glowed, its interface clean, intuitive, and alive with real-time analytics. It was Ben's masterpiece. He knew every line of code, every API call, every painstakingly optimized database query that made those charts dance. He remembered the 3 sleepless nights he'd spent wrestling with a stubborn data caching issue, finally solving it at 4 a.m. with a solution so elegant it had made him laugh out loud in his silent Jersey City apartment. Now, Alistair was pointing at that very feature, a predictive sales trend model with a proprietary flourish, as if he'd personally birthed it from the ether. The board members, a collection of stony-faced venture capitalists in the company's C-suite, were rapt. They leaned forward, their expensive suits creasing, captivated not by the data, but by the narrative Alistair was weaving around it. He was a storyteller, a salesman of the highest order, and his product today was Ben's work, repackaged as his own strategic vision. Ben could almost hear the words through the thick glass, the corporate jargon of appropriation. As I spearheaded this initiative, the intelligence system I implemented, my team's vision for data-driven sales, each imagined phrase was a small, sharp sting. He watched Alistair's reflection in the glass, a confident, smiling figure superimposed over Ben's own faint, still image. He was a ghost haunting his own creation. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a cold, heavy knot in his stomach. He had poured his intellect, his time, his very essence into that dashboard, and in return, he was granted a front-row seat to its public theft, watching from the cheap seats outside the velvet rope. The meeting was winding down. A round of appreciative nods, a firm handshake from the CEO. Alistair caught Ben's gaze through the glass for a fraction of a second. There was no charade, no charming smile, just a flat, cold look of triumphant ownership. A silent, brutal confirmation that he knew Ben was watching, and he didn't care. The heavy glass door of the Hudson room swung open with a soft, hydraulic sigh, releasing a wave of self-congratulatory chatter and the lingering scent of Alistair's cologne. Ben forced his focus back to the lines of code on his screen, pretending to be absorbed in a complex problem, a defense mechanism he'd perfected over the years. But there was no avoiding the victory lap. Alistair, flanked by the CFO and the head of marketing, was making his way directly toward Ben's desk. The others peeled off, but Alistair continued, his sharp footsteps a drumbeat of impending confrontation. He didn't stop at a respectful distance but came right up to the edge of the desk, leaning over it, invading Ben's personal space. The sheer difference in their presentation was a chasm. Alistair's crisp white shirt cuffs, adorned with subtle gold links, were inches from Ben's worn, slightly frayed keyboard. "Ben," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, almost friendly tone that was more unnerving than his public pronouncements. "Great work on the back-end stability. Rock solid." It was a crumb of praise, meant to placate. "Just one minor tweak I need. A client demo tomorrow, big fish. I want to add a custom filter to the main revenue chart. Something to isolate performance by a new vertical I'm proposing. Shouldn't be too hard for you." The request was a command wrapped in casualness, a reminder of his station. As he spoke, his eyes drifted down to Ben's laptop, the whirring fan suddenly seeming 10 times louder. A small, contemptuous smile played on Alistair's lips. "Christ, are you still using that relic?" he said, loud enough for the surrounding desks to hear. "The fan sounds like it's about to achieve liftoff. We can't have the Helios dashboard running on a museum piece. I'll talk to IT about getting you an upgrade, buddy." The word buddy landed like a punch, a public declaration of Ben's lowly status and the company's neglect. Ben felt his face flush, the heat of shame prickling his skin. He simply nodded, his throat too tight to form a reply. Alistair seemed satisfied by his silence. He straightened up, ready to depart, his power reasserted. But as he turned to walk away, he paused and looked back, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. "And Ben," he added, his voice now a low, serious murmur, "make sure those numbers for the quarterly review are aligned by morning." The board was very impressed with my projections. The email arrived at 4:32 p.m. A sterile, automated notification from the corporate calendar system that landed in his inbox with the quiet finality of a guillotine. The subject line was a masterpiece of HR-sanctioned euphemism. "Urgent leadership huddle. Q3 marketing campaign post-mortem." Ben wasn't leadership, not by any stretch of the imagination, but his presence was requested. Alistair had made sure of it. The meeting was in the Liberty Room, smaller and more intimate than the main boardroom, which only made the impending execution feel more personal. He walked into a wall of silence, a dozen pairs of eyes, the heads of every department. flicking to him, and then quickly away. Alistair stood at the head of the table, his expression a carefully constructed mask of somber concern. On the large display, a single slide glowed with a graph that plunged downward like a falling knife, illustrating the catastrophic failure of a recent digital marketing campaign. It was a campaign whose targeting parameters had been fed directly by Ben's predictive model, the very one Alistair had been praising just weeks ago. Ben felt the cold air of the room seep into his bones, a premonition of the chill to come. Alistair cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense quiet. "As you can see," he began, his voice laced with theatrical disappointment, "the results were not just subpar. They were a significant drain on resources. We've spent the last 48 hours conducting a full audit to understand the point of failure." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before turning his gaze, slowly and deliberately, onto Ben. "The breakdown, we've discovered, originated from the data itself, a flawed predictive model, which fed the campaign faulty intelligence, leading to a gross misallocation of capital." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Ben's blood ran cold. He felt his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He opened his mouth to object, to explain that a model is only as good as the sales data it's fed, but the CEO cut him off with a raised hand, his eyes fixed on Alistair with unwavering trust. "This is a severe breach of data integrity, Ben," Alistair said, his voice now cold and sharp, the performance over. "It represents a level of gross negligence that has put this company's pre-IPO valuation at risk." The words were a death sentence, each syllable a nail in his professional coffin. And in that moment, the years of quiet resentment in Ben's soul finally cooled and hardened into something diamond-sharp and unbreakable. The walk back to his desk was a gauntlet of averted eyes and the sudden, intense focus of colleagues on their screens. He was radioactive, a contamination in the clean, productive ecosystem of the office. He could feel the whispers like static on his skin, the pity and the morbid speculation. He sat down, the worn cushion of his chair offering no comfort. His hands were trembling slightly, a tremor of pure, unadulterated rage that he forced down, balling his fists under the desk until his knuckles were white. The accusation was absurd, a lie so brazen it was almost brilliant in its simplicity. He knew his model. He knew its logic was sound. It could only have failed so spectacularly if the underlying data, the historical sales data it used to learn, had been systematically corrupted. The memory of Alistair's parting words from the day before echoed in his mind, no longer a casual command, but a chilling piece of a larger, horrifying puzzle. Make sure those numbers are aligned. Alistair hadn't been asking him to cook the books for the future. He had been confirming that Ben's systems were still reflecting the books he had already cooked in the past. It was a setup, a meticulously planned corporate assassination. Alistair needed a scapegoat to cover his own tracks and simultaneously eliminate his only credible rival for the VP of Operations role, the head of marketing, whose campaign had just been publicly executed, using Ben's name as the weapon. The injustice of it all was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest and making it hard to breathe. He stared at his monitor, the lines of code a meaningless blur. For a moment, a wave of utter despair washed over him, the urge to just pack his few belongings, walk out, and never look back. But then, he thought of his rent, his student loans, the sheer, crushing unfairness of being erased by a man who built his success on the stolen work of others. The despair receded, replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't resign. He would burn it all to the ground with the one thing they couldn't take from him: the truth. As the office lights began to dim and the sounds of keyboards and conversations faded, he stayed put, watching the clock, his plan beginning to form in the terrifying silence of the emptying floor. The office at night was a different entity entirely, a skeleton of its daytime self. The aggressive hum of the air conditioning was more noticeable, the server room's drone a constant, low thrum that seemed to vibrate up through the soles of his shoes. The only light came from the emergency fixtures and the cold blue glow of his own monitors, casting long, distorted shadows that danced at the edge of his vision. Every sound was magnified. The creak of his chair, the distant rumble of the subway beneath the building, the frantic beat of his own heart. He felt like a trespasser in his own workspace, a ghost haunting the machine he had built. His hands hovered over the keyboard, the plastic cool beneath his fingertips. This was the point of no return. As the primary database administrator, he had root access to everything, a level of privilege granted out of necessity and built on a trust that he was about to violate. He wasn't just checking a log file. He was conducting a covert internal investigation, an act that, if discovered, would be immediate grounds for termination for cause, likely accompanied by a lawsuit. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the recycled air tasting of dust and anxiety. He opened a secure shell terminal, the black screen with its blinking green cursor, a portal into the system's deepest secrets. He typed the command to connect to the primary AWS instance, his fingers moving with a deliberate slowness to prevent any typos. The system prompted him for his multi-factor authentication code. He pulled out his phone, the screen blindingly bright in the darkness, and typed in the 6 digits, his thumb feeling clumsy and slick with sweat. Access granted. He was in. He navigated through the directory structure, his mind a razor-sharp map of the server's architecture. He was heading for the one place that was inviolable, the digital stone tablets of their entire operation, the immutable audit logs. These weren't simple application logs that could be edited or deleted. They were cryptographically secured records of every single command executed on the database, time-stamped and preserved. Alistair could manipulate the data, but he couldn't erase the memory of his actions. Ben crafted the query, a complex string of commands designed to pull all database update events from the last 18 months, filtering for access outside the company's VPN and after business hours. He hit enter, and the cursor blinked once, twice, before a stream of data began to pour down the screen, a digital waterfall that held the evidence of a crime. He watched the raw data scroll past, a chaotic river of timestamps, user IDs, IP addresses, and SQL commands. To an outsider, it was an incomprehensible wall of text. But to Ben, it was a story waiting to be read. He piped the output to a file and began the painstaking work of forensic analysis, his exhaustion vanishing, replaced by a hunter's focus. He first filtered the logs for any activity originating from outside the company's known IP ranges. A pattern began to emerge almost immediately, a single recurring IP address that appeared like a phantom in the logs. The connections were always made between 2:0 a.m. and 4:0 a.m., a dead zone of corporate activity. The timing was suspicious, but the dates were damning. They clustered in the days immediately preceding the end of each financial quarter, the exact window when sales numbers were finalized for bonus calculations and board presentations. A cold dread, mingled with a grim sense of vindication, settled in Ben's stomach. He cross-referenced the timestamps with Alistair's expense reports for client dinners, which were legendary for their late hours, but the IP address never matched a restaurant's Wi-Fi. This was something else. This was methodical. He isolated the commands executed from this ghost IP. It wasn't just data access. It was a series of update commands, surgically precise and devastatingly clear. Update sales ledger, set deal value, 15,000 where deal ID, 743B. Update sales ledger, set account manager, Alistair. Vance where client ID, GUC 921. It was all there in black and white. Inflated deal values, reassigned accounts, poached from junior salespeople right before the quarter closed. The total value of the fraud, from a quick mental calculation, was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in unearned bonuses and commissions. This wasn't just a setup. It was the cover-up for a long-running heist. With his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, Ben copied the mysterious IP address. He opened a new incognito browser window and navigated to a public IP lookup service. He pasted the string of numbers into the search bar and clicked enter. The page loaded, and the details began to resolve on the screen. ISP, Verizon Fios. Location, Suffolk County, New York. And then, the final, gut-wrenching confirmation that tied the entire conspiracy directly to the man in the charcoal Italian suit. A detail so specific and arrogant, it made Ben's breath catch in his throat. The result of the IP lookup painted the screen in stark, undeniable characters, and the information it provided was so perfectly, poetically arrogant that for a moment, Ben felt a wave of dizziness, as if the world had tilted on its axis. The service provider was Verizon Fios, a common enough detail, but the registered location was not some anonymous data center or a rented office space. It was a residential address in the Hamptons, Alistair's beach house, the place he bragged about in all-hands meetings, the backdrop for his carefully curated Instagram posts showing him laughing with clients, a glass of rosé in hand, the Atlantic Ocean sparkling behind him. The fraud, The systematic theft that had likely netted him hundreds of thousands in unearned bonuses wasn't being committed from a place of stealthy caution. It was being orchestrated from a monument to his own success, a palace built, in part, with the very money he was stealing. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was what struck Ben the hardest. It wasn't just a crime. It was a statement of untouchability. The hot, impotent rage that had been simmering in his veins for hours suddenly cooled, replaced by something far more dangerous, a glacial, crystalline clarity. He wasn't dealing with a simple office bully or a credit-stealing boss. He was dealing with a predator who believed the rules were for other people, for the Bens of the world who rode the PATH train from their overpriced Jersey City apartments while he re-architected reality from his oceanfront throne. He thought of Alistair's Audi A7, a sleek silver bullet in the executive garage, and the stories of his $1 $200 client dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. It was all a performance, funded by a lie. The lie that Ben was now staring at, glowing on his monitor, in the oppressive silence of the empty office. He realized with a sickening lurch that the public humiliation, the scapegoating in the Liberty Room, wasn't personal malice. It was just business. It was risk mitigation. He was a loose end, a potential threat to this entire criminal enterprise, and Alistair had moved to neutralize him. A cold resolve settled deep in his bones, heavy and solid. An IP address was a powerful piece of evidence, a direct link, but it wasn't enough. He needed to build an entire autopsy of the betrayal, to lay out every single dissected piece of the fraud so clearly and undeniably that not even the most loyal CEO or high-powered corporate lawyer could explain it away. He needed to show them not just where the crime was committed, but precisely how the theft was executed, down to the last stolen dollar. With the ghost IP address now anchored to a physical location, Ben turned his attention back to the raw log files, the digital DNA of the crime. He began the methodical, painstaking process of cross-referencing every single update command executed from the Hamptons IP against the production sales database. It was like piecing together a shattered vase, each fragment of code a clue to the original pristine reality before Alistair's hammer had struck. The first pattern to emerge was the reassignment of accounts. He saw the names of junior salespeople, young, hungry kids fresh out of college, their digital fingerprints all over the initial client acquisition records. He could almost feel their excitement in the data, the flurry of notes and logged calls. Then, like a phantom, the Hamptons IP would appear in the logs at 3:17 a.m. on the final day of the quarter, and a single brutal command would execute: Update Sales Ledger Set Account Manager, Alistair Vance Ware Deal, ID US 8112C. Just like that, a deal worth $50,000, nurtured for months by a kid named Sarah from the marketing team, was now Alistair's. He remembered Sarah mentioning that client, how proud she was. A week later, he'd heard she'd missed her quota by the slimmest of margins and had been placed on a performance improvement plan. The realization hit Ben like a physical blow. Alistair wasn't just stealing money, he was kneecapping careers, sabotaging the very people he was supposed to be leading. He opened a new encrypted spreadsheet on his local drive, naming it Audit Trail, XLSX. He began to document every instance, creating a grim ledger of the theft. Timestamp, original sales rep, deal ID, Alistair's command, and the bonus commission Alistair would have received. The numbers climbed at an alarming rate. $12, $0 here, $25, $0 there. But then he found the second, more insidious pattern, the direct manipulation of deal values. For accounts that were already his, the late-night commands would simply inflate the numbers. Update Sales Ledger. Set deal, value, here 25,000. Where deal, share value, here for 17,500. And deal, choose 904 FI. An extra $75,000, created out of thin air. He cross-referenced this with the client contract scans on the shared drive and found the original, smaller number. It was blatant, undeniable fraud. As he dug deeper, he noticed something else. A strange anomaly in the client names associated with the most heavily inflated deals, a detail that suggested this went far beyond simple bonus manipulation. The anomaly was a series of client names that felt wrong. They were generic, corporate-sounding, but lacked any real digital footprint when he ran a quick search. Names like Apex Strategic Solutions LLC and Global Synergy Partners. They were ghosts. Unlike the real clients poached from junior reps, These entities seemed to exist only within their sales ledger. This wasn't just about inflating existing deals. It looked like Alistair was fabricating them entirely. Ben's investigation pivoted from the database logs to the financial systems, specifically the expense reporting portal. He navigated to Alistair's profile, a place legendary within the company for its eye-watering sums. He scrolled past the endless stream of four-figure dinner receipts from Tribeca steakhouses and tabs from exclusive cocktail bars, the kind of spending that built Alistair's mythos as a master networker. But Ben wasn't looking for extravagance. He was looking for connections. He filtered the reports by vendor payments, searching for the ghost client names. Nothing. That was too obvious. He tried another approach, searching for large, recurring payments to consulting firms. And then he found it. A monthly retainer of $15,000 paid out like clockwork to a company called North Shore Advisory Group. The name was innocuous, but the timing was perfect. The payments had started 18 months ago, coinciding exactly with the first appearance of the Hamptons IP in the database logs. Ben's fingers flew across the keyboard as he ran a search on the vendor. The company was registered in Delaware, a classic move for obfuscation. But the registration agent had filed public documents, and on one of them, listed as the sole director, was a name that made the blood in Ben's veins turn to ice. Caroline Vance, Alistair's wife. It was a shell company, a kickback scheme of breathtaking simplicity. Alistair was creating fake deals with a fake client, then using his director-level authority to approve payments to a fake consulting firm that was, in reality, his own family. He was laundering company money, funneling it directly into his own pocket, and using the inflated sales figures from these phantom deals to juice his performance bonuses. The sheer criminality of it all was staggering, far beyond anything Ben had imagined. He now understood the desperation behind the frame-up. An internal audit, even a routine one, could have uncovered this. He had to be silenced. And as Ben stared at Caroline Vance's name on the screen, he remembered a conversation from last year, a quiet rumor about a junior analyst on Alistair's team who had resigned abruptly, and he knew exactly where he had to look next. The final frontier of his digital autopsy was the most dangerous, the corporate email server. Accessing another employee's inbox without explicit, documented authorization from HR and legal was a fireable offense of the highest order, a violation of privacy and company policy so profound it could get him blacklisted in the industry. But he was already a dead man walking. Alistair had made sure of that. The public accusation of gross negligence was a kill shot to his reputation, a preemptive strike designed to discredit anything he might say. He had nothing left to lose, and an entire criminal enterprise to gain. Taking a deep breath, he used his root privileges to mount a read-only snapshot of the archived mail server, a ghost copy that would leave no trace of his intrusion. He wasn't a hacker, he was an archaeologist, carefully brushing away the dust to reveal the bones of a buried crime. He navigated to the archive of the junior analyst who had vanished last spring, a bright kid named Leo. Ben remembered him being sharp, inquisitive, maybe a little too naive for the corporate world. He ran a search through Leo's sent items for emails addressed to Alistair containing keywords like discrepancy, sales report, and data integrity. The result was a single chilling email thread. It began with Leo politely flagging an issue. "Hi, Alistair. I was running the numbers for the quarterly review and noticed a few deals with values that don't seem to match the signed contracts. Probably just a data entry error, but wanted to flag it." Alistair's reply, sent minutes later, was curt. "Handle it. And let's discuss this offline." The thread went cold, but Ben's search was just beginning. He expanded his query to include the head of human resources. And there it was, a separate thread, initiated by Alistair the very next day. Subject: urgent and confidential, Leo Martinez. In it, Alistair wrote of performance issues and a disruptive attitude, recommending immediate termination. The head of HR's reply was a masterclass in corporate CYA, referencing a mutually agreed separation and the importance of a standard non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a generous severance package. It was all there, in black and white. Leo hadn't just resigned, he had been silenced. He had stumbled upon the fraud, and Alistair, with the complicity of HR, had paid him off with company money and gagged him with an NDA. Ben felt a profound, soul-crushing sadness. The casual cruelty of it, the destruction of a young man's career to protect a lie. He finally understood. He was never part of the team. He was never our code wizard. He was just another tool to be used, and, when necessary, another threat to be disposed of. saving a complete, cryptographically verifiable copy of the emails, the logs, the expense reports, and the shell company registration to a secure thumb drive. He knew his plan could not afford a single miscalculation. The thumb drive in his pocket felt heavier than a block of lead, a dense, solid core of digital damnation. Back in the relative anonymity of his Jersey City apartment, with the glittering skyline of Manhattan, a distant, indifferent constellation, Ben made a conscious shift. The frantic, adrenaline-fueled panic of the past 48 hours began to recede, replaced by something colder, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. A methodical, architectural calm. He was no longer a victim reacting to an attack. He was a strategist designing a counteroffensive. He poured himself a glass of tap water, the silence of his small living room broken only by the low hum of his personal server rack, a testament to a life spent building systems. He spread the downloaded corporate policy documents across his IKEA dining table. The whistleblower policy, the code of conduct, the non-retaliation agreement. He read them not as an employee, but as a hostile analyst, dissecting each clause, noting the carefully constructed legal jargon designed to protect the company first and the individual a distant second. He saw the prescribed channels: report to your direct manager, Alistair, or report to HR, the same department that had rubber-stamped Leo Martinez's severance and NDA. It was a closed loop, a system designed to absorb and neutralize threats, not to expose them. He understood then that playing by their internal rules was a guaranteed loss. He had to operate outside the system he knew so well, leveraging a network they didn't even know he had access to. His gaze fell on his phone, and he thought of Mark, his first mentor, a grizzled senior engineer who had been pushed out during a reorganization 5 years ago. Mark had taught him that the most important network wasn't the one made of fiber optics, but the one made of quiet favors and shared grievances. And Ben knew he needed an ally who was no longer on the company's payroll. The call to his old mentor was brief and cryptic. Ben speaking in careful hypotheticals, dancing around the specifics with the caution of a man walking through a minefield. Mark listened, his silence on the other end of the line more understanding than 1,000 words of sympathy would have been. He didn't ask for details. He simply gave Ben a name and a number. Arthur Chen, he'd said. He's not cheap, but he's a dragon. He specializes in executive malfeasance and whistleblower protection. Tell him I sent you. The next afternoon, Ben found himself in a sterile midtown office that smelled of old leather and quiet money. Arthur Chen was a small man in his 60s, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing, assessing Ben with a disconcerting stillness as he laid out the broad strokes of the situation. Ben didn't hand over the drive. He simply described its contents. He explained the IP address, the shell company, the email silencing Leo, the public scapegoating. Arthur listened without interruption, his hands steepled under his chin. When Ben finished, the lawyer didn't offer platitudes or outrage. He offered a strategy. "This is not an HR complaint," Arthur stated, his voice calm and precise. "This is a notification of material risk to the company's pre-IPO valuation, directed at the board's audit committee. We bypass HR. We bypass the CEO's personal loyalties. We present this as a fiduciary crisis." He explained the process. They would prepare a formal whistleblower submission, securing federal protections before anyone at the company even knew Ben was a threat. He laid out the likely outcomes: a swift, quiet settlement with a rock-solid NDA, or a bloody internal investigation that would detonate Alistair's career and reputation. The retainer fee he quoted was a staggering sum, nearly half of Ben's savings, a figure that made his stomach clench. It was the price of admission, the point of no return. As Ben authorized the transfer on his phone, a feeling of irreversible commitment washed over him. He was no longer just an employee. He was a plaintiff. The lawyer gave him a crucial piece of advice as he was leaving, a final strategic directive that would shape everything to come. The audit committee is your only true audience, but you need to get to them through the right channels, and you need to protect yourself from retaliation before you fire the first shot. The nights that followed were a blur of intense, focused creation. Ben transformed his small apartment into a war room, fueled by cheap coffee and a cold, burning sense of purpose. He wasn't just compiling evidence. He was forging a weapon. Following his lawyer's advice, he began to construct the narrative, not as a slide deck, but as a live, irrefutable demonstration. On a secure, sandboxed cloud server he provisioned with his own money, he created a perfect mirror of the company's production environment. He loaded a snapshot of the sales database, the expense reports, the archived emails, and the immutable audit logs. He then spent hours writing a series of scripts, elegant and brutally efficient pieces of code designed to perform a live digital autopsy. He rehearsed it relentlessly, talking to the empty chair where the CEO would sit. With a single command, his script would highlight a dozen inflated sales figures. A second command would instantly pull up the scanned client contracts on the left side of the screen, showing the original smaller numbers. A third command, the kill shot, would display the corresponding audit log entry on the right, the exact timestamp, the update statement, and the glowing, damning IP address registered to Alistair's Hamptons getaway. He built a visual timeline, showing how the fraudulent transactions clustered just before quarterly bonus payouts. He created a flowchart that connected the phantom deals for Apex Strategic Solutions directly to the approved expense reports paying the monthly consulting fee to North Shore Advisory Group, with a final damning click revealing the Delaware registration document bearing Caroline Vance's name. He was weaponizing his intimate knowledge of the system, turning the very infrastructure he had built to empower the company into an instrument of precise, undeniable justice. While running through the sequence for the 10th time, tracing the financial impact of the fraud, he stumbled upon the final, most arrogant piece of the puzzle. One of the largest fabricated deals, a ghost contract worth $250,000, had been explicitly cited in the business case Alistair submitted to justify the creation and budget for the new VP of Operations role, the very promotion he had engineered this entire charade to win. With the evidence packaged and the delivery mechanism perfected, Ben shifted his focus to the human element of the battlefield. He spent hours on the company's investor relations portal and on LinkedIn, studying the public profiles of the 3 key members of the board's audit committee. He wasn't just learning their names, he was learning their histories, their professional DNA. The committee chair, Eleanor Vance, no relation to Alistair, a detail he found grimly ironic, was a retired partner from a Big Four accounting firm with a reputation for merciless rigor. Another member was a former federal prosecutor who had specialized in securities fraud. The third was the CFO of a publicly traded tech giant, a man whose entire career was built on pristine financial reporting. These were not people who would be swayed by Alistair's charisma or the CEO's loyalty. They were guardians of shareholder value, and Ben now held evidence of a multi-year fraud that directly threatened the integrity of the company's valuation right before its lucrative IPO. He realized Alistair's critical, fatal miscalculation. In his arrogance, he saw Ben as a simple, replaceable cog, a code wizard in a worn hoodie, never imagining that the cog had the master key to the entire factory. Ben began to map out the timing of his attack. He needed to strike at a moment of maximum psychological impact. He watched the corporate calendar, noting the CEO's travel schedule and the upcoming deadline for quarterly reports. He chose his date, a Thursday morning, 2 days after Alistair was scheduled to give a triumphant Q3 sales results presentation to the all-hands meeting. He would let Alistair have his moment of glory, letting his hubris reach its absolute peak before the fall. Then, Ben crafted the meeting invitation, a masterpiece of corporate ambiguity. Subject: Urgent Data Governance and Compliance Review. The title was intentionally dry, using keywords the CFO and General Counsel were professionally obligated to attend. He invited them first, along with the CEO. He waited for their acceptances to populate. Only then, as the final step, did he add Alistair to the invite. A deliberate act of psychological warfare, ensuring Alistair would see the names of the company's most powerful executives already on the list, making it a summons he could neither decline nor question without appearing guilty. On the final evening, a profound and unnerving calm settled over Ben. The rage and anxiety had burned away, leaving behind only the cold, clear certainty of his plan. Following his lawyer's instructions, he executed his final defensive maneuvers. He logged into his personal banking app and transferred the bulk of his life savings into a new account at a different bank, one the company had no record of, insulating his finances from any potential corporate retaliation or legal freeze. He performed a secure wipe of his personal files from his company-issued laptop, leaving behind only the work he was paid to do. The complete evidence package, the digital bomb he had so carefully constructed, now existed in only 2 places: on the encrypted thumb drive in his desk drawer, and on a secure server in Arthur Chen's law office. The trap was set. He walked to his closet and pulled out the one suit he owned, a simple charcoal gray wool, still in the dry cleaner's plastic from the last wedding he'd attended. He laid it out carefully on his bed, alongside a crisp white shirt and a conservative blue tie. It felt like a costume for a role he was about to play, a final shedding of the wizard-in-the-corner persona. He was no longer infrastructure. He was the event. He stood by his window, looking out at the vast, uncaring city across the Hudson River. For years, he had felt invisible, a ghost in the machine. Tomorrow, for 15 minutes, he would be the most powerful person in that company. The machine would finally answer to him. His phone buzzed on the table. It was an automated acceptance notification from Alistair's calendar for the 9:00 a.m. meeting. A moment later, a new message popped up on his screen. A direct instant message from Alistair himself, dripping with the casual condescension that had fueled Ben's long nights. "Got your meeting invite, buddy. Whatever data issue you found, make it quick. I have a closing lunch at Cipriani." The air in the Hudson boardroom was a different kind of cold from the WeWork floor. It was a still, expensive cold. The kind that spoke of a perfectly calibrated silent HVAC system and cost thousands a month to maintain. Ben felt it not on his skin, but in his lungs. He sat at the far end of the vast mahogany table, his new suit feeling like a cheap costume, its fabric stiff and unfamiliar against his skin. Across the polished expanse, Alistair commanded the room, flanked by the CEO, Richard Sterling, and the head of HR, a woman named Janice whose expression was a permanent mask of procedural neutrality. Alistair's suit today was a shade of blue so dark it was almost black, the kind of material that rippled like liquid when he moved. He began without preamble, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone of regret. He spoke of data integrity, of fiduciary duty, and of a catastrophic failure in our predictive analytics pipeline. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The carefully chosen corporate jargon was more damning than any accusation. Then, Janice, on cue, slid a thick, glossy folder across the table. It stopped inches from Ben's hand. The cover read, in stark, bold letters, "Performance Improvement Plan, Benjamin Carter." Ben stared at it, his heart a slow, heavy drum in his chest. He could feel Sterling's gaze on him, heavy with disappointment, a trust irrevocably broken. Alistair was a master of this theater. He had poisoned the well so thoroughly that the truth was now irrelevant. Ben was no longer a person. He was a liability, a problem to be managed. He opened the folder. The pages were dense with HR speak, outlining impossible metrics and weekly reviews with Alistair himself. A 90-day march to a preordained execution. It was a document of pure administrative violence, designed not for improvement, but for documentation of failure. Alistair leaned forward, his gold cufflinks catching the light. "This is a formality, Ben," he said, his voice dropping to a tone of feigned sympathy. "It outlines a path forward, should you choose to take it. But we need to be realistic about the damage that's been done. If you are enjoying this story of betrayal and calculated justice, please like this video. It helps us bring you more stories like this." Alistair let the implication hang in the silent room for a long moment, allowing the weight of the PIP to settle on Ben like a shroud. He then made a small, almost imperceptible gesture to Janice. The HR head, with the practiced efficiency of a mortician, slid a second, much thinner folder across the table. This one was plain manila, unmarked, and it felt impossibly light compared to the dense indictment of the PIP. "However," Alistair continued, his voice shifting into a tone of magnanimous pragmatism, "Richard and I have discussed this at length. We understand the pressure you've been under, and we believe in amicable solutions. We're prepared to offer an alternative, a way for you to move on from this without a blemish on your record." Ben opened the second folder. Inside was a 2-page document titled Separation Agreement and General Release. His eyes scanned the key clauses, his mind a cold analytical engine processing the data points of his own demise. The severance package was a calculated insult. 2 weeks' pay. It was less than his monthly rent. He saw the non-disclosure clause, a sprawling paragraph of legalese that forbade him from discussing anything related to his employment, the company's practices, or its personnel. Then he saw the non-disparagement clause, a venomous little sentence that effectively gagged him for life. This was the real goal. Not the PIP, not the firing. This was about buying his silence for pennies on the dollar, ensuring the ghost of Leo Martinez would never have a companion. Ben felt a strange, detached calm settle over him. He was watching a play, and he knew his lines. He looked up from the paper, not at Alistair, but at Janice. He kept his voice level, devoid of emotion. A simple request for information. "I see the standard non-disclosure language," he said, his voice sounding distant even to his own ears. Does this agreement supersede the company's stated whistleblower policy regarding communication with federal regulatory bodies? The question, precise and clinical, landed in the center of the table like a single drop of acid, and for a fraction of a second, the perfect composure of Alistair's face seemed to ripple. Alistair's recovery was instantaneous, a mask of charming condescension snapping back into place so quickly Ben might have doubted he'd seen the flicker of unease at all. He chuckled, a low, dismissive sound meant for the benefit of the CEO. Ben, he said, shaking his head slowly as if explaining a complex concept to a child. You're an engineer, not a corporate attorney. That's just boilerplate. Standard stuff. It's about protecting our intellectual property and ensuring a clean break for both parties. Let's not get bogged down in legal hypotheticals. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the gleaming mahogany, his posture shifting from that of a manager to that of a predator. The performance was over. This was the threat. Let me be perfectly clear about the choice you have in front of you, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing purr that was more chilling than a shout. You can sign this agreement today. You walk out of here with a small cushion, we agree to provide a neutral reference confirming your dates of employment, and you can start fresh somewhere else. Or, you can choose the other path. You can fight the PIP. You'll be terminated for cause within 90 days. And I will personally ensure that the story of your gross negligence, the negligence that cost this company millions in a critical pre-IPO stage, is the very first thing any recruiter hears when they do their background check. This industry is smaller than you think. He sat back, the threat delivered, confident in its brutal power. The CEO, Richard Sterling, remained silent, his gaze fixed on a point on the far wall, a willing accomplice through his own inaction. Ben looked at the pen resting beside the documents. He felt the weight of their collective certainty, their absolute belief that they held all the cards. He picked up the pen, its cold metal a conduit for the icy resolve flooding his veins. He pulled the PIP folder towards him, opened it to the final page, and signed his name on the line acknowledging receipt. He then pushed the severance agreement back toward the center of the table. I appreciate the offer, he said, his voice steady. I'll need 24 hours to review this with my family before I sign. As he stood to leave, his role in their drama concluded, Alistair smiled, a wide, triumphant grin of a man who had just won. Take your time, buddy, he said, the word a final, parting shovel of dirt on Ben's corporate grave. Just know the offer expires tomorrow at noon. True value is often built in silence, through quiet competence and unwavering integrity. It doesn't need a spotlight or a title to validate its existence. Arrogance, on the other hand, is a performance. It is loud, flashy, and built on a foundation of shifting narratives and borrowed credit. It demands constant attention, for in the quiet moments of scrutiny, it risks collapsing under the weight of its own emptiness. In the end, a reputation built on truth is a fortress, while one built on lies is a house of cards, waiting for a single, steady breath to bring it all down. What do you think is the most satisfying way for karma to be delivered in a workplace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The walk back to his desk was the longest of his life. Every head in the open plan office turned to watch him, a slow-motion ripple of morbid curiosity. He could feel their gazes on his back, a mixture of pity, speculation, and a touch of fear. He was a cautionary tale in a charcoal suit, a ghost walking away from his own execution. The usual office symphony, the clatter of keyboards, the low murmur of conversations, the ringing of phones, seemed to hush as he passed, a pocket of respectful silence for the condemned. He reached his desk, the island of controlled chaos that had been his professional home, and sat down in his worn chair. The whir of his old laptop's fan felt like a familiar, comforting sound in a world that had just been turned upside down. He didn't look at his screen. He didn't reach for his mug. He simply sat there, letting the performance of the last hour play back in his mind, cataloging every word, every gesture, every calculated threat. Alistair's condescending buddy, the CEO's cowardly silence, Janice's procedural detachment. He wasn't feeling rage or despair. Those emotions had burned out during the long nights of his investigation. What he felt now was a profound, almost serene clarity. The board had been played, the game had been rigged, and Alistair, in his arrogance, had just handed him the final, irrefutable piece of evidence he needed. A documented bad faith termination attempt, a clear-cut case of whistleblower retaliation before he had even blown the whistle. His personal phone vibrated in his pocket, a silent, urgent buzz. He pulled it out under the cover of his desk. The screen lit up with a new email. The sender was Arthur Chen. The subject line was a single word: filed. Ben opened the message. It contained a PDF with a time-stamped confirmation number from the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower. He was protected. The trap was no longer for him. As he looked up from the screen, his gaze swept across the office and landed on the glass wall of the Hudson boardroom, where Alistair was now standing, laughing with the CEO, a conquering hero silhouetted against the New York skyline. The meeting was set for 9:00 a.m. in the Hudson boardroom, the same silent, glass-encased arena where Ben had watched his own work be stolen. This time, however, he was not an observer. He walked in at 8:59, his charcoal suit feeling less like a costume and more like armor. The CEO, Richard Sterling, was there, along with the CFO and the General Counsel, their faces etched with a mixture of impatience and curiosity. They were the company's brain trust, the guardians of its financial and legal integrity. And Ben had summoned them with a subject line they were professionally incapable of ignoring. Alistair was the last to arrive, striding in with a theatrical sigh, his phone pressed to his ear. He gave Ben a dismissive nod, a gesture that said, "This had better be good, buddy." He ended his call and took a seat beside the CEO, radiating an aura of untouchable confidence. He smelled of expensive cologne and victory. Ben said nothing. He simply walked to the head of the table, opened his personal, non-company laptop, and connected it to the massive 8K display. The screen flickered to life, showing not a PowerPoint slide with a corporate logo, but a stark, black terminal window with a blinking green cursor. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the room. Alistair leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips, clearly amused by the engineer's idea of a presentation. Ben's hands moved over the keyboard, the quiet, precise clatter of the keys the only sound in the room. He didn't speak. He let the data speak for him. He ran his first script. On the left side of the screen, a list of sales figures appeared, the exact numbers Alistair had presented in his triumphant Q3 review. On the right, with a second command, a column of scanned client contracts materialized, the original smaller deal values glowing in red next to the inflated numbers. The CFO leaned forward, his glasses slipping down his nose, his eyes narrowing. The General Counsel's pen, which had been still, began to move, a series of sharp scratching sounds on her legal pad. Alistair's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "Ben, what is the meaning of this? If there are data discrepancies, you should have come to me," he started, his voice a low growl of authority. But Ben didn't look at him. He simply executed the third script. A third column appeared, populated with raw data from the immutable AWS audit logs, each entry time-stamped, showing the exact update command that had altered the numbers. And next to each command, a single, recurring IP address. Ben clicked on it. A map of Long Island filled the screen, a red pin dropping onto a waterfront property in the Hamptons, a place they had all seen on Alistair's Instagram. The smirk was gone now, completely erased from Alistair's face, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask of dawning horror. If you are enjoying this story of betrayal and calculated justice, please like this video. It helps us bring you more stories like this. The silence that descended upon the room was absolute, a vacuum that seemed to suck the very air from Ben's lungs. He could feel the collective gaze of the executives shift from the screen to Alistair, a silent, heavy judgment. Alistair opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, clicking sound emerged. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, his meticulously constructed reality dissolving before his eyes. Ben gave him no time to recover. His fingers were already moving, a blur of practiced motion, launching the next phase of the digital autopsy. He brought up the company's expense reporting system, displaying a list of approved monthly payments, a recurring $15 $1,000 retainer paid to a vendor named North Shore Advisory Group. He then cross-referenced this with the sales ledger, showing that the vendor was associated with a series of phantom clients, Apex Strategic Solutions, Global Synergy Partners, the very same accounts whose deal values had been most egregiously inflated. A legitimate consulting expense, approved through proper channels. Alistair finally managed to rasp, his voice thin and reedy, a pale imitation of his usual confident baritone. He was grasping for a plausible explanation, a lifeline in a sea of damning data. Ben's response was another keystroke. The screen split, and on the right, a Delaware registration document for North Shore Advisory Group appeared. Listed as the sole director, in stark, undeniable print, was the name Caroline Vance. The CEO made a small, strangled noise, a sound of profound betrayal, and physically pushed his chair back from the table, as if to create distance from the corruption now sitting beside him. Ben wasn't finished. He ran his final script, and the email archive materialized. He displayed the polite, concerned query from Leo Martinez about data discrepancies, followed by Alistair's curt, handle it offline reply. Then, the kill shot. The separate email thread initiated by Alistair to HR the very next day, recommending Leo's immediate termination for performance issues, and the subsequent discussion of a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. It was all there. Financial fraud, a cover-up, and whistleblower retaliation laid bare in a cold, chronological narrative of verifiable facts. Alistair's face had gone from pale to ashen, a sickly gray color. A fine sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, and his hand, reaching for a glass of water, trembled so violently that the ice cubes rattled against the glass. Ben closed the terminal window, his demonstration complete. He looked across the vast, polished expanse of the table, directly into Alistair's wide, terrified eyes, and spoke for the first time, his voice calm, steady, and utterly final. The data is clean. The logs are forever. 6 months later, the light in Ben's office was different. It wasn't the aggressive blue-white glare of fluorescent tubes in a sterile WeWork, but the warm, late-afternoon sun of a Brooklyn autumn, filtering through the large industrial windows of a converted warehouse in Dumbo. The air didn't smell of burnt coffee and recycled oxygen. It smelled of fresh paint, old brick, and the rich, dark roast he'd brewed himself in the small kitchenette of his own company. He ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of his desk. Not cheap particle board, but a solid slab of walnut, a tangible representation of the world he had built from the ashes of his old one. The settlement from his whistleblower submission to the SEC had been substantial, a quiet, multi-million-dollar figure that had not only covered his legal fees, but had provided the seed capital for Logos Data Integrity, the consulting firm he'd co-founded with 2 other senior engineers who had also grown weary of the corporate charade. They didn't have a view of Hudson Yards, but they had a view of the Manhattan Bridge, its steel latticework a monument to real functional architecture. His work was no longer about propping up a narrative for a charismatic salesman. It was about building fortified, transparent systems for clients who valued truth over performance. The frantic, high-pitched whine of his old Dell was a distant memory, replaced by the near-silent hum of a custom-built workstation that handled complex compilations without breaking a sweat. The constant, gnawing anxiety in his stomach had vanished, replaced by a quiet confidence he hadn't known he was capable of. He had seen the fallout of his boardroom presentation only through the cold lens of the financial press. The IPO was indefinitely postponed, pending a full SEC investigation. A terse press release announced Alistair Vance's immediate termination for violations of the company's code of conduct. A later article in the Wall Street Journal detailed the board's decision to initiate clawback proceedings to reclaim years of fraudulently obtained bonuses, a legal battle that would likely drain Alistair of everything he had. Ben felt a distant, clinical sense of justice, the satisfaction of a complex system finally balancing itself. It wasn't personal anymore. It was just data. But as he scrolled through his LinkedIn feed, a suggested connection popped up for a junior salesperson from his old team, Sarah, and a single, chilling message in her profile's About section told a far more personal story than any newspaper ever could. Sarah's new profile picture showed her smiling, standing in front of a new company logo, her title now Senior Account Executive. The message Ben had seen was an endorsement from a former colleague, praising her resilience and integrity. It was a small thing, but it was everything. He realized the true scope of his actions hadn't just been about punishing a thief. It had been about liberating the honest people who had been suffocated by Alistair's toxic ambition. His own success wasn't built on a foundation of stolen credit and phantom deals, but on the quiet, unglamorous work of building things that were true. The money was a tool, not a scorecard. It had bought him freedom, not a new Audi A7 to park in a reserved spot. He thought of Alistair, stripped of his titles, his reputation incinerated, his name now a permanent red flag on every compliance and background check in the financial industry. The Hamptons Beach House, the source of the damning IP address, had been sold in a fire sale to cover the initial wave of legal fees. His wife, Caroline, whose name had been the final key to unlocking the shell company, had filed for divorce. Her own reputation stained by association. The carefully curated performance of a perfect life had been revealed as nothing more than an empty stage set. Ben looked at his own reflection in the dark screen of his monitor. He wasn't a code wizard or a ghost in the machine anymore. He was a founder, an architect, a man who had chosen the terrifying path of truth over the comfortable silence of complicity. He had learned that real power wasn't in a corner office with a view, but in the immutable, unchangeable facts that lay beneath the surface of things. The world could be manipulated, narratives could be spun, and lies could be dressed up in Italian suits. But the truth, once recorded, had a weight and a permanence that no amount of charisma could ever erase. The logs were, and always would be, forever.